I'm so delighted you are here today. My name is Neeli Bendapudi, and many of you know me, I hope, as an alumna of this university. For the past 5 years, I was Dean of the School of Business here, and month 3 on the job as Provost. And as you can see, I'm still smiling. I have never worked harder at any job. I've never enjoyed anything more. This is a privilege and an honor for me to serve this university. And so one of the greatest joys of being provost is I get to interact with people across the entire spectrum of KU and show off so many of you, very similar to what I did in the Chancellor's Guest House under Jean Budig and Gretchen Budig, so it's wonderful. It's been a delight to me, especially to work with Carl Lejuez, your dean, that I'm going to introduce you to. To me, he is everything you could ask for in a colleague, incredibly smart, incredibly thoughtful, incredibly caring, sees the big picture. I could go on and on. I have a formal bio, but you knew all that when you picked him. So I will point out a couple of highlights and maybe a few personal comments about him that you might not know. As a researcher, you know that he is one of the best known in the entire world. He's one of our top researchers at the university in terms of, when you look up citations, etc., for his work on addictions, personality disorders, and mood disorders. Comes to us via Maryland, as you know, and really known for interdisciplinary work because of what he did at Maryland with the Neuroimaging Center. And what I really appreciate is at the college, how much attention he has paid to getting to know Kansas and getting to know our students. You may not realize it, but he has been to some really fantastic hotspots, haven't you? For a Jersey boy, he's taken aback by the beauties of Kansas, and he has really helped to tell our story seriously, all corners of Kansas. A couple of things I want to tell you is last spring, it's his idea, his initiative, when he saw there were a number of students at risk, where he suggested that we get volunteers from the faculty to mentor students. And I understand that this is year 2 of the faculty mentoring program, and 80% of the students who met with a faculty mentor have raised their GPA. So thank you, Carl, for that great idea. He's also well known for inviting people to coffee. If he does, I suggest you take him up on it, and that you suggest meeting in his office. Having enjoyed the espresso in his machine, I vouch for it. 2 other things. I said, come on, Carl, you can't just give me a bio. You need to tell me something about you, because we need to get to know you. So on the way down here, he listened to Eminem. Apparently, that's one of the artists he follows pretty coolly, I think, for a dean. And he also is a big fan of NASCAR. Did you know that? This is a Renaissance man, ladies and gentlemen. With that, please join me in applauding Carl Lejuez as he kicks off the inaugural State of the College. We hope to do this, and then there will be plenty of time for Q&A. With that, Carl Lejuez.
Thank you so much, Provost Bendapudi. Provost Neeli, or just Neeli.
Yes.
So before we start, you can't accomplish anything without a great staff. So I would just like to ask all of the college staff, associate deans, assistant deans, our entire staff to just stand up for a second so we could recognize them. So when I was a young boy growing up in New Jersey, I always thought, someday I'm going to go to Kansas. So, I started in the Garden State. Next thing I know, I'm in Garden City. All right, so those are my jokes. What is true, though, is when I was a graduate student, the very first article that I read was from a Kansas professor. It was actually Ed Morris. I didn't understand it that day. I'm still not sure I understand it today. But this was the introduction that I've always had about KU, that this is an amazing place with fantastic faculty who are at the cutting edge of the things that we want to do to impact the world, to impact our students. I always knew that we had great students at KU because I would meet them at conferences. I would hear about things that they've accomplished. I would see them in jobs, and that's just in psychology. And what was something I didn't really expect was how much our alumni love being at KU. And so I wear this pin. My wife gets a little embarrassed because I'll wear it when we go on trips. And we were in Washington, D.C., and someone came up to me and was like, "Rock Chalk!" And I almost dropped my coffee because I wasn't prepared for it. But it's a great experience to feel like you're part of something and feel like you're doing something meaningful. And that's why we wanted to do the State of the College. We wanted the opportunity to talk about where we are and where we're going. And talking is something that's really important to me. I've had coffee with probably 150 faculty and staff at this point. I've met with easily that many students. In the first 3 months, I went to every unit. That's 57, from dance to physics, as I like to say. And I had a chance to understand who we are. Because it's one thing to be a leader, but it's another thing to lead within, to understand what the issues are and to be a part of it. And I have been so overwhelmed with how generous everyone has been in sharing what their experiences have been. And so as I start today, and as we'll move into talking about priorities, it's first important to acknowledge that there are some hard things happening. The liberal arts and sciences are under attack. There's no other way to talk about it but to say that. Now, things are changing. People are starting to understand, companies are starting to understand that if you're going to create an amazing technology, maybe understanding the ethics, something we teach pretty well in the liberal arts and sciences, is important. If you're going to sell a product, being able to communicate about what it means is important. And that's just in the ways that you can apply what we learn. It also makes us better people. It makes us better thinkers. It makes us better citizens of the world. And that's what we do in this college. That's what we're preparing our students to be. So we have that challenge, but that part is pretty amazing. We also have another issue that I really didn't expect when I came here. Knowing about our great alumni and the way that I perceived the way the University of Kansas was seen from where I was across the country, it didn't dawn on me that there are parts of our state that don't necessarily feel like KU is their university. When we go west of Route 81, or we go into Kansas City, Kansas, there are people who say, KU really isn't for me. And in our efforts to try to help those students understand why it might be, we've sometimes come off as tone deaf. And that's an issue that we have to face, not just for recruitment, but just for our identity as the University of Kansas. The other issues are, we're working really hard in retention and student success, but no one thinks we're where we need to be. No one thinks that we've identified all the ways that we can use this amazing human capital and human resources that we have to be able to work with students and be able to help those who are struggling. And that's an issue. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is one that some days we see it right in front of us, like today, where students, faculty, and staff feel like we're not coming through in all the ways that we can. But this is an issue that's here with us every day. It's an issue that we should be compelled to think about at all times, and I'm going to come back to that particularly. And maybe most importantly, or most relevant to everything I've said, is our budget. There's no way to deny that this impacts where we are, what we're trying to do, and it just impacts how we feel valued for the things that we're doing, and it impacts our students. It impacts the staff that are available to them, the faculty available to them, the tuition that often leads to students working an unprecedented number of hours. So there's some 5 issues, but I'm here to tell you I did not come here to wave a surrender flag. And I know you all didn't either. So we have to think about, in this context of these issues that we have, what's our pathway forward? What are the things that we can take that are already strengths, because there are many, many strengths here, and connect to those challenges? And our provost said something that really struck me the other day. She said, I'm looking for people who aren't running away from problems. I'm looking for people who are running towards them. And so that's what I'm here to do, and that's what I know other people in this room are here to do. So let me talk about those priorities. I'd like to start first with building our research infrastructure and the impact of that research. Now, before I talk about what we want to do or need to do, let me talk about what we are doing. We have some of the best research happening in the world. If you think about issues that matter right now, think about migration. Think about the way that is impacting the world. We have a center for migration research on campus that brings together some of the best thinkers on these issues. And not in a simple way, in a complex, bi-directional, multidisciplinary way. If we think about other types of research that are having an impact, if we think, sorry, I lost them. I'm not going to pretend I didn't lose myself for a second. If we think about disease and think about the impact that has, what's happening in molecular biosciences, trying to understand basic processes of these diseases, and the way in which that we can start to do basic science that can start to impact what cures are and the ways that we can move forward. Or Yoon Mi Nam and her work in modern art and these beautiful flowers that she draws, that makes me think about the temporariness of things. And in my work as an addiction researcher, the fleetingness of sobriety, when I see her work and I think about what that means, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel intimidated by modern art. It's not just about the research that's happening in laboratories and in performance spaces, but also being public intellectuals. The work that Leonard Krustalka is doing, the work that Sean Alexander is doing, impacting the world around us, standing up for things that matter, and building it from within basic theory, basic science, basic human nature. That has a huge impact. Or what we're doing in the community. When you look at the work of Yo Jackson and how she's helping us understand how this traumatic event that happens to a child can either leave them crushed under the weight of it, or they can build traumatic growth from it. These are things that impact the world we're in and speak volumes to the type of people we are. The way that our area study centers say to both coasts that you're not the arbiters of culture, of understanding the world around us, that we do this really well right here in the center of the country, has a huge impact. So as we move forward, I think it's important to think about, how do we support that work? How do we send the message, as I said, that it's not just the research we're doing, but the impact we're having on the community, the extent to which we are public intellectuals. Part of the issue of our budget really does matter. That does impact us. But we have to be assertive in finding resources. We are working very hard with KUEA to build a research excellence fund, something that can support researchers who are looking to get that next grant just as much as our really talented associate professors who have that great idea for a next book, but are struggling because, one of our strengths is how much our faculty teach. When you look at our aspirational peers, I think we're outperforming them when it comes to that. But it also means that that's harder for our faculty to do the work that they need to do. So we have to find ways to provide that support. We can't just say, research matters, now go and figure it out yourselves. So that is incredibly important to what we'll be doing. The second thing is that I believe we have an identity as a student-focused college. Now, it's research intensive for sure. So when we think of what Mary Emma Graham is doing, helping students understand how to use technology and the digital humanities to learn about the history of Black writing and hear about these untold stories, that's an educational experience for our students. When we think about what Joy Ward is doing and the way in which she takes really bright and eager undergraduates and sends them off to graduate school, that's precisely one of the things that make us special. We are a research-intensive, student-centered university. The research that we're doing is not here and the students are here. They are together. That's what makes us special. That we bring faculty from all over the country, all over the world that are amazing. That's because of our research status. And those faculty are impacting our students. So we need to not forget that when we talk about the student experience, it's not something in addition to research, it's something that lives because of our research. But there's two other very important issues when we think about our student and the experience that they have. The first is students wanting to come here. As I mentioned before, we do have a bit of an identity problem. And I think the way that we solve that is through being authentic, being present. So when I went on the Rock Chalk Roadshow, when I went to Garden City, when I went to Hutch, when I went to Salina, every chance I got, I tried to talk about the things that are happening here that many students around our state don't really know. They don't understand how someone like Paul Stock in environmental studies is working on sustainable agriculture. They don't understand how someone like Tony Bolden is bringing scholars together to talk about Kendrick Lamar and how the poetry and the literature of his work impacts people's lives. They don't hear that. They just hear that we're not K-State, or they just hear that we only care about certain parts of our state. So we have to be out there. We have to be telling that story because our story is great. And if we're there, we will have an impact. And so for the first time, we have a recruiter within the college. Now, anytime you have a budget crisis, you always have to think about the expenses that you make. But it's not spending less, it's being strategic. And so having this recruiter allows us not only to be present at events throughout the state, but also for our majors where we don't have students taking these things in high school, where they're not learning about these really important areas. We don't want them just hearing about this when they're juniors or seniors. We want to get that message out now. So the recruiter helps us do that. And then in terms of our student success, we talked about the mentorship program. I mean, I'm happy about the idea, but I'm proud of the way everyone has rallied around it. So now we're up to almost 200 faculty. And I have 2 students myself, and it's been amazing. One student, on a daily basis, I want to strangle her to death. But she's trying. And another student gets everything right. He's keeping me on task, I think, if anything. And that's the type of experience we can have when we use the people that we have here and the strengths that we have here. I also think we need to be sure to talk about where our graduate studies are. And quite frankly, you could argue that being a graduate student is probably the toughest time in your career. You're not sure what you want to do next. You're around people who want you to be just like them. I don't know if there's any grad students here. If there are, you know what I'm talking about. And we're not where we need to be with stipends. We're not where we need to be with graduate research assistantships. And I think, to be frank, we have some structural issues that probably will never allow us to compete with some of our aspirational peers when it comes to that. But there is creativity and things that we can think about doing, ways in which we can add research assistantships by being able to think about best ways to invest our resources, ways that we can think about supporting our students writing writing federal grants, writing small grants from interdisciplinary research or interdisciplinary foundations that provide them the opportunity to get that training that they need, whether they're going to go into that profession or whether they're going to move on to something else in another field. These are the types of things that we can do with the right strategies in place and the right effort. And as I mentioned before, the third priority is in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm a proactive person. My wife is a last-minute person. It drives me crazy. I'm planning way ahead for everything. There are times when we have to respond to things, and I think the college has done a good job with that. But when we talk about these issues, it's really about being proactive. It's really about what are you doing all the time for these issues, making this a place where students feel safe, where they feel welcome. And we took a very assertive approach and hired for the first time an associate dean for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And out of that hire, we have an amazing plan. And if you haven't seen it yet, I really encourage you to check it out. There's parts of it that respond to some of the things that are happening in the moment, but there's really about how do we build our faculty? How do we make it so that our students feel like there's other people here like them? How do we address these systemic issues that make people feel unsafe on campus? These are the types of things we're doing, and we will do this every day. So if we're moving forward and saying, how do we follow these three priorities, it is important to acknowledge there's some reasons why it may be hard to do that. I think about our staff, and I think about how hard they're working when we're not able, in every case, to rehire someone and what that feels like for them, what their experience is like. Or for our faculty that came here because they saw a way to build their discipline, and now they've had a faculty member retire and a faculty member go to another university, and we're not able to replace that position right away. It's depressing. It starts to eat away at that enthusiasm, at all that made us want to come here. And it's particularly hard when you're a student or a staff or a faculty member, and as I've said, you don't feel safe here. You don't feel welcome here. So as we move forward, we need to think about those issues, but we also need to remember what made us want to come here. What made us want to go into the liberal arts and sciences? We are working incredibly hard in the dean's office to be strategic, to be creative. I think we've done, and there may be questions about this, an incredibly good job of spending efficiently, of finding ways to do more with less, just as we've asked you to. You know, as our campus has experienced a 5% budget cut, we've actually taken a 10% budget cut in our office, and still, that's counting these other positions that I mentioned, because we're in this together. So I really appreciate you coming here today. I know our staff really appreciates it. I am looking forward to getting some questions, some tough questions, maybe a few softballs, hopefully, but probably a lot of tough ones. When you do have a question, if you'll raise your hand, we'll bring a mic to you. If you can say your name, kind of what your role is at the university, and what unit that you're affiliated with, that would be great. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Joe Harrington, professor of English, University Senate President. You sent out an email earlier today announcing that there will be an examination of the college bylaws with regard to the College Academic Council, which is the elected representatives of the faculty. Thank you, first of all, for sending that out. Communication, transparency, that's really important. But I'm just wondering, what sort of changes do you envision to the College Academic Council, to the bylaws?
Thank you. So I actually don't have any great plans for that. I think the main thing is we haven't updated it in 8 years. And I think that things have changed. And I think that there are aspects of the bylaws that are not clear in ways they could be. So this was a request from CAC, where they actually asked that we do it. And as I looked into it, I realized, wow, this really is important. And thank you for mentioning the email we sent out today. I got some great feedback from a faculty member who said, you know, I worry that anytime these changes happen, I mean, he was worried about nefarious things happening, to be quite frank, but I worry about the extent to which it's really the faculty's voice. And that was a great opportunity for me to hear that. So, and if anyone's not aware, we sent out an email that basically said we'll be going through the bylaws in the CAC meeting, and we invite everyone to come to it. Now, I don't know how many people will come, but if this is something that's important to you, we want your voice to be there. So I would really say this is one of those cases where we want to make sure that the governing bylaws are as clear and as relevant as they can be today. So thank you for your question. You know, when I had my job talk, I only had one question, and I went home and I said to my wife, I'm not getting this job because nobody asked me any questions, so.
Hi, Jean Klein, faculty in theater. I don't know if you have statistics on this, but the sense that I've had over my 30 years here, is that staff-wise, there's been a rise in the number of administrative, associate deans and subs and administrative and other offices and like the DEI person, et cetera. So I'm wondering if you know what the stats might be over the last 5-10 years of the proportion of those staff positions in relation to the proportion of faculty who are teaching.
Yeah. So I don't know over that period of time. What I can tell you is that the budget for our office is about $200,000 less than it was the previous year. Now, the way that we did that, again, was we tried to be strategic. We basically gave a lot more work to Henry, and so he's so if you see him, give him a pat on the back and maybe a glass of water. So Henry is actually working with two different sets of units right now, partially because they're both smaller, and Henry has a unique ability because of his experience to be able to serve those units really well. We also were very strategic and careful about aspects of the college that weren't functioning as well as it could. And so we made some pretty significant cuts in terms of some services that weren't being used. And what we did was we put together a strategy where we would make sure that those services were provided better in a more efficient way. And so the strategy of it was not to use efficiencies to spend it elsewhere, but to use the efficiencies to make sure the services stayed the same, but then we were investing it elsewhere. And we've been given very generous support for the next few years for our diversity associate dean, because we felt that we could help the overall campus at the same time as doing things that were important to us. So I can't tell you where we were maybe 5 years ago, although I can tell you in our comparison to our aspirational peers, my senses were either middle of the road or a bit less. When I was at Maryland, our college was just 10 units, and there were 4 associate or assistant deans in addition to the dean. So I'm not suggesting that just because others are doing it that we should too, but I do appreciate the question. And the biggest part of it is if we're asking you all to absorb these really difficult cuts, then we have to make sure that even in the service of trying to provide better services to you all, that we're not doing it at the expense of a new faculty member or the staffing you need. So thank you.
Hi, thanks so much, Carl. My name is Betsy Esch. I'm in the American Studies Department, and we're a unit that's grown wonderfully over the past few years. I'm new here. This is my third year, and I love my job and my department and have been thrilled. And I don't want to work on a campus where there are guns in my classroom, and that's about to happen. And I suspect most of the people here are at least concerned and mostly opposed to that happening. I know this isn't your job. I know we're all waiting with bated breath to hear the proposal that's going to come from the chancellor that will go to the regents. But I suspect, like K-State, that proposal is going to, in fact, even strategically, have to say something like, we don't have the money to do what's required of us to prevent guns from being in our classrooms, so guns will be in our classrooms. And I feel the need to raise this as a community of scholars, of humanists, of people concerned about those global citizens, and as recruiters of colleagues, of visitors, of guests, of students to this place. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So I have to tell you, before I came here today, Erin said to me, make sure you talk about guns because it's important to people and we have to tackle it head on. One of the problems with going off the cuff, if you've seen me read from a piece of paper, it's mind-numbingly boring, which is why I don't do it. But sometimes you forget when you're going off the cuff. That is one of the things that I meant to talk about, and I'm sorry I didn't. And I'm sorry because I know how much this impacts our students, our faculty, our staff. So I am on the committee that put that report together. So I can only talk about it so much, but what I can say, and I don't think this satisfies that by any way, but we had a chairs and directors meeting, so the 57 unit heads, and we talked about, and I'm not happy about saying this, but under the assumption that they are coming, what are the things that we have to make sure we do in terms of training, in terms of the messages that we're sending to people so that they understand the responsibilities they have if they're bringing guns to campus, and what are the ways in which we can work with our faculty to try to make this the safest experience possible given that issue. I'll be frank, I think anything short of us saying we're not going to do it is going to feel disappointing. And it's interesting, you being from American Studies, in psychology, we just don't get that political. So I went 15 years and mostly never, I worked in low-income neighborhoods. Drug use was the work I did. I could have been. I had lots of opportunities and I never did it. And your department, in a good way, has kind of shamed me into really thinking, am I, not on purpose, it was self-induced shame, but like, am I doing enough? Am I speaking out enough? Am I holding that responsibility that I now have as a dean? And so I really struggle with this because I feel like at this level our hands are tied in terms of what we can do. I think there are things we can do at a individual level to create at least a sense that this is not something people are happy about. But what I took as my role here at this point is to try to make it as safe as possible, given that's the case. I don't believe that's a satisfying answer, but I think that's kind of where we are now. Thank you for your question.
Hume Feldman, Physics and Astronomy. First, I'll throw you a softball, as you asked. You said that that it drives you crazy that your wife is a last-minute thing. Wonder what it does to her that you are let me ask the second question, then I'll sit down and can deal with it the way that you want. I think that all of us, but certainly our department, is struggling a lot with this new innovation that came into KU in the last few years, and it's called SSC and Central IT. I was wondering if you have any thoughts about the matter.
Yeah. So, well, I have lots of thoughts about the matter. When I came in, has been in place for quite some time. And I understand that there's a lot of struggle. I understand that there is something meaningful to faculty and staff about having someone there, someone that, what I've learned is that many of the staff who were in the units before were doing their job plus, and that plus in many ways is now gone. My understanding is that the SSC is here. I believe that the people who are running it are very competent. I appreciate them. I appreciate what they're trying to do. They're in a really tough spot because they, at some level, are responsible or are viewed as responsible for that plus being gone. I don't think there's ways that we would go back. Should probably just say that. I mean, this isn't my decision, but that's my sense of where we are. So I think what we have to make sure we're doing is that we are gathering as much information as we can about where you are struggling. And as the budget gets better, because it has to at some point, I think we're doing a lot of the right things, then we need to think about what are those things that you're missing and how do we want to spend our resources? Do we want to spend it in bringing in more faculty? I mean, we're going to bring in more faculty regardless, but do we really want to emphasize that? Do we really want to emphasize salaries and support? Do we really want to emphasize our ability to do preemptive retentions? Do we want to emphasize making sure that we have the right staffing? So I feel like I only have questions that I don't have good answers for, and I was prepared for this one, but I think at some level, we have to make sure as a college that we're supporting you in this new reality. So, thanks. I mean, probably the same, yeah. And I think I know less about that. I'm still learning where the strengths are and where the weaknesses are. So. And part of today is me hearing. So if we don't, what I often will do when I meet with faculty is if I don't have an answer, that'll be something that I'll be obsessed about. And I'll think about it, and so you'll probably get an email from me, and we'll talk about it more. I mean, I know these are issues we need to struggle with, but I think sometimes it's easy to forget about those, particularly when there's others that you feel like maybe you can impact a bit more. But when these are ones that are really impacting our faculty, then I think it's problematic for us to not be thinking about it. Now, what I thought you were going to say, I'm going to set myself up with a question. Was about some of the online and curricular choices that we're making. That's another thing that I didn't talk about that I wish I had. One thing I do want to say is when we're thinking about this idea of meeting students where they are, we are really trying to think about how do we keep our mission, how do we keep rigor, but also create some curricular opportunities that will help students where they are. Access is a very big issue for a lot of our students, and so creating online courses where we keep the rigor up, where we choose courses that are good for that medium, that's something that's important to what we're doing in the college. We're also, for the first time, going to have winter term courses. This is the 4 weeks in between the fall and the spring. This provides a great opportunity for faculty in that they can teach one of their courses in that term and then have a lighter load in either of the semesters. But mostly this is for students. This is for students, to be quite frank, like one of my mentees who really would do better focusing more on a smaller number of classes a little more deeply. And so her ability to take a course that might otherwise tank her entire semester in that winter period is going to be really important. And so I have heard some feedback about winter term and online, and I think it's very important that we make sure we do this in a way where the rigor stays high, but that we're thinking about how we can be as creative as possible and really figure out what students need. And this also gets to the idea that we've recently sent out for the first time an online feedback, and we got an enormous amount of really good feedback. And just to let you know what our strategy is, What we're going to do every year in the fall is we're going to open up the feedback portal. Now, it was for faculty, graduate students, and staff. In the spring, it will be for students, for undergraduate students. And then every year at the end of the fall, we're going to take all the feedback and report back. This is what we were given, these are the issues, this is how we plan to address it. And then every spring, we're gonna essentially provide a report card. Here's what we were able to accomplish, here's where we are, here's what we weren't able to do as we would like, and here's what our plan is moving forward. So I didn't answer the softball question, but in a way that one might be more tricky. So I think it drives her crazy.
I'm loud enough for the mic. The college is in the process of just developing a strategic plan, and last week the chancellor announced that she'll be retiring. Could you describe how those two will articulate with each other and the role that you see of the college in the decision to hire a new chancellor?
Yeah, maybe I'm a bit of a, in my own field, a bit of a narcissist here, but I think we have a lot of autonomy in what we do. I think the things that we care about are things that matter. I don't think anyone would look at these issues and say, these are not exactly what our college needs. And that's partially because these three pieces were built from our faculty and from our students and from our staff. So my sense is everything that we're trying to do is likely what we're going to do regardless of who comes in as chancellor. Now, if that changes, then I'll address it. But I'd like to think that as a really great large unit, that we're going to have a really positive impact on the thinking of the next chancellor in the same way that that chancellor will impact our thinking. I thought there was, oh yeah.
Hi. Victor Agajanian, sociology. I think I heard you say that you expect the budget situation to improve. What is this expectation or projection based on? And
oh, I didn't mean like soon. I just meant ever. Like at some point it has to get.
Too bad. I was
sorry, that was more existential than anything. But I will say, we have the most amazing budget officer who has made it so easy for us in the dean's office to be strategic, to not just say no to everything, to think about ways where we can, and I know we don't think of ourselves as a business, that's not why we went into this, but to generate resources in ways that I think are gonna have a really big impact. Now, it doesn't mean that that'll happen immediately. We've also been very careful in how we've been hiring. We're not holding money back. I promise you, you would be horrified if you saw what our cushion is right now. But we have a plan for the next few years that I believe, even without significant help from the state, we will be able to put ourselves in a better situation. So sorry to be misleading.
I think as the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, one of the things that we might have to deal with, and it seems like we're already having the conversation, is how do we understand issues of inclusion and diversity in conversation with academic freedom and speech. So I'm just kind of curious about how do you think about the relationship between the two, because that's certainly a conversation that's happening locally, but also nationally as well. So just interested in your thoughts about that.
Right. And who are you, Clarence?
Clarence Lang, Department of African and African American Studies. We're political too, by the way. So.
But that's mostly Jenny's influence, I'm guessing. So I think this is a tough issue. It's a tough issue because at a core level, the idea of students, faculty, and staff feeling safe, feeling welcome, feeling like there aren't things that are happening on campus that are telling them we don't want them here. To me, that's the most important principle. At the other side, I do understand that we have free speech in this country, and there are times where people are going to say things that we don't like. And that's part of our job as educators to try to, I mean, most of that work, quite frankly, is done by you all. It's done in the classrooms. It's done in the experiences you have with students. I mean, I think as a college, and this is something that we're working on together in that plan, we have to be able to stand up when there are times where someone's voice goes from having an opinion to impacting others in significant ways on our campus. And I can't say that I always know the answer to this. And these are the types of things that keep me up at night. And we do a lot of questioning of, okay, this is what happened, but what if this happened? What would we do in this case? And this is where I think we have to come up with what we think is the most reasonable strategy and be honest about what that decision was and what the implications of that can be. So, I mean, that's an answer that probably is impacted the most by the fact that I don't think there's a good answer. I don't think anyone has a good answer for this right now. But I do think the impact on the people here has to be the first thing that we pay attention to.
I'm Leitu Erasmus Campbell from the Anthropology Department. I'm the graduate officer. As part of the recruiting, what is the college doing as far as when you go to recruitment fairs, a lot of the programs that seem to stand out here is School of Business, Engineering. What is the college doing to get these smaller departments to get their name out? I was wondering, do you guys have a budget that you could create, maybe flyers that they can take that say or hard science, social science, languages, something that would get attention to the college?
Yeah.
Because we get so much of the other.
Well, we're actually doing that. And so that's where our recruiter, first off, comes in. And I've actually gone on some trips with him. I went to Manhattan last week, and we went to a school, and we talked to 17 kids that it's a small school, but I can guarantee you those 17 kids all said they had never heard anything about KU before. We have actually some great materials. We have a majors marketplace that Christy Henderson has been working incredibly hard that allows you to put in some keywords and figures out what majors might be good for you. I don't think it's the issue of the materials, or actually in this case even the budget. I think it's the college making the decision that we want to put ourselves out there. I've heard from so many people when I was on the road, this is the first time that we've seen someone from KU. Now, I'm not sure that's actually true because I know admissions is working really hard at this. I know many faculty here are doing this. But that is the perception. And perception takes a while to change. And I think what we have to do is not just get me out there more, but also find ways to get our faculty out there more in really strategic ways and in ways that help students understand in an authentic way why they might want to come here. Because that story is not out there. That story of the story that we're the flagship or we're the best or things that sometimes ring hollow and seem elitist can be out there. But that message of if you come here, there are opportunities to transform yourself and go a place you've never been before, or to go back to your community and make it a better place. That's a message that really resonated. Another one that came up a lot was students would say it's just too big. But when you ask students here from places like Hanston, how long was this a big place for you? They'll say 2 or 3 weeks. And so when prospective students hear that, if you go to a small place after 2 or 3 weeks, you're stuck. If you're at a big place, the way you can titrate it, the way you can have, and if you're involved in research, or you're involved in community service, or you're doing study abroad, or you're involved in clubs, that's how the students talk about making it small. So there are true, authentic stories that make this the place where not every student, but many more students could be really happy. And so in addition to getting those materials out, I think it's getting are warm and really caring personalities out there. Thank you.
Mary Graham, Department of English. I have to go back to the question that Betsy asked, because it seems to me that there is a fundamental contradiction to, on the one hand, say, we need a place where we feel safe, and then, on the other hand, say, we must prepare for guns. I have a difficulty with that because we're talking about students feeling safe, we're talking about faculty feeling safe, we're talking about an ethical issue. I mean, it's fundamentally a lie. So I know it's not a question you can answer, but I feel obligated to point out the contradiction.
Yeah. Honestly, it's a contradiction. I mean, that's when I mention, feeling shame about it. That is because I'm fully aware of the contradiction. If I could see a pathway where what we could do as a college had any hope of preventing them from coming here, I would be doing it. And we would be doing it. And I'm not suggesting that's the right answer. Maybe we haven't thought enough about it. Maybe this means that I'm very open to hearing things. If there are ideas, if there are things, and I know as the dean, it's partially my job to be the one generating the ideas, but it's also my job to be honest and say where I don't know the answer and ask our faculty to tell me, to work with me. If there is a pathway and we really believed that it would have the impact that we wanted, I would be open to it. I just don't know what it is, and unfortunately sometimes I'm maybe too practical for my own good, and I've moved to the idea of trying to control what I feel like I can. But you're 100% right.
Glenn White, Applied Behavioral Science. Just a question, there's been an emphasis on online courses and so forth and unprecedented building around the campus. And I just wonder if there's a kind of a delicate balance between, at what point is there, you find building more bricks and mortar versus online courses? Is there a delicate balance in really achieving parity in each of those, or is that even possible?
Well, I think you could argue that the building and the renovations that we're doing now, both in the sciences and in the arts, are simply to get us up to an acceptable standard. Now, the integrated sciences building is going to be amazing, but we have faculty and students that are working in situations, both in film and then also in the sciences, that are just not acceptable. And so I think when it comes to that is where building becomes really crucial. I do also think that there are cases where to be able to do that next generation of research, even more recent buildings just aren't enough for that. And I'll be quite frank, I really feel for the faculty who are not moving with those buildings, who are still in buildings that are not where we need to be. And when we think about moving into the future, in the same way that we kind of made this decision for film, we need to make this decision in terms of renovating, that we have to get our science facilities up to a reasonable level. And I think until we do that, there's really no question about where is the right line. I think once we're beyond that, then I think we want to ask those questions. But from my perspective, online is about access. It's never meant to be a replacement. And when I went to sociology, there were some faculty who really inspired me in how they talked about how they developed their online course in a way that would work really well and actually in some ways was better or it was more conducive for certain courses. But we never will be an online university. I don't want us to be. I believe that when it is used to enhance our mission, that's where it's important. So I can see where they look like they may be opposing each other, but in reality, in terms of where we see each, I'm not sure that they do.
This is late too again. I just wanted to ask, can it possibly, not mandatory, but make it part of the employment process of learning how to de-escalate a situation given how the campus climate's going to change? I mean, I know GTAs are going to be different than what faculty needs are versus staff versus incoming students, but I think something like that would be very helpful for all of us.
Well, and I think that your question gets at, for me, what is kind of a Sophie's choice of, do we make a stand on this issue, or do we focus our energy on, if it is happening, how do we try to do it in the safest way possible? So there are some of those very things you talked about in the proposal, and we will do more as a college. We will, until, as long as there are faculty that are saying, accepting that it's coming here, we're not doing this enough, I guarantee you we will do everything we can to try to ensure that that happens. That doesn't solve the first issue, and I appreciate Mary Emma raising it, but I think in terms of that second issue, I do think I am very comfortable with being held accountable for that.
My wife, when I leave home, since we're talking about life today, she asked me if I had my sign written on my hand, which says, "Shut up, Alan." But there is an issue that you haven't touched that is extremely important to me, and I don't know for sure that my facts are right, but I believe they are, and that is that we have an inordinate number of associate professors on campus. And I wondered, I'm rather disturbed about that, very disturbed about that. I'm not sure it's a matter of budget. As a matter of fact, I think it is often caused by habit. And I would be interested in knowing if you have a plan for changing that, because I think it's essential to the future of the University of Kansas.
Well, I'm glad you didn't write it on your hand, because that's a question I'm actually happy to answer, because we've been talking about it a lot. I've met with several faculty who have come to me and raised this issue. I'm not 100% sure I'm right about this, but I believe this issue is particularly the case where a second book is the next step to tenure. And so Paul Kelton and other ADs and I have talked about what are ways where we can help our faculty move from that great idea to getting the book done when we're asking them to do more and more of everything else. So we actually have a plan in place to do a few town halls to bring some associate professors in and actually figure out with them where the pain points are. I mean, we've had some ideas, but I don't want to go forward until we know. Like, one idea I've had, and maybe this is a terrible idea, but it's to think about how could we maybe build a consortium of other Big 12 schools where every associate professor who's in the context of writing their book was willing to read another associate professor from another university's book to provide that peer feedback. And so you're getting someone to do it without any additional budget, and you're reading, it is a lot of work to read their book, but it may be in an area you enjoy, and it's something that provides that intellectual push that might be necessary. I think these issues are much bigger. We've talked about ways where we could use budget to try to address that, but from what I know, you're 100% right about this issue. And it's not to say it's not happening in other disciplines too, but I do think that's one where if we don't have this fixed, another one that crosses my mind is awards. And I sometimes people talk about this idea of Kansas humility and that we don't put ourselves out there and we don't speak for ourselves. And I know most of the people in my office, when I compliment them, they get embarrassed. I've never experienced that where I'm from, so that's a little weird for me. I feel like if I'm going to roast someone in my office, I would just compliment them. But those are issues that I think that we can address. And I would dare to say that a year from now, you will see policies in place and you will see activities in place that will be based on information we've gathered and strategies to try to address it. And I'll just tell you one real quick that we're about to start is we're thinking about ways where we can find a reasonably small amount of money to fund a few graduate student fellowship and then also smaller grant awards that aren't funded. Because when you ask students what's so challenging and you ask faculty, they often say, well, it's a lot of work, and if they don't get the grant, then sometimes people will say it's wasted time. Now, I may disagree with that. I may think it's really important regardless, but I hear that, and that makes sense to me. And if an issue is the likelihood of success, and we could take, $40,000, and if it could have a dramatic impact on the number of students writing these, it would pay for itself well over by the sheer fact that we would get more of these grants funded. So again, these are just ideas that are percolating now. We won't move forward with these until we talk to faculty and understand that they're really what is going to have that impact. But I do appreciate you asking the question.
Hi, I'm Mabel Rice from the Department of Speech Language Hearing and the Child Language Doctoral Program. I would like to bring us back to where you had started with one of your priorities being in research and graduate studies. And I would appreciate it if you could connect some dots for us. We've been talking a lot about what could be considered local issues or our reputation within our immediate communities and all. We also have a reputation that matters a great deal in our peer institutions, whether there are aspirational peers, the other Research One universities in the AAU. Can you walk us through how you see the relationship between these initiatives and efforts that you are putting in place, and how that will help us in what seems to be a risk for declining in our reputation, where it matters on the bigger stage if we are to recruit the new faculty we need, if we're to keep the faculty that we have that we wish to keep, if we're to recruit the doctoral students and the undergraduates that we want to be here.
Yeah, so, it's interesting. Before I came here, I was a faculty member for 15 years. I ran a research center. This is all I thought about. I was the associate dean for research for 3 years. I don't know if you remember my talk, but I mostly talked about research. In fact, afterwards, I felt badly that I didn't talk enough about students. When I arrived, that didn't change, but what I started to realize was that we have some infrastructure issues in terms of our students that are impacting our budget, that are then impacting our ability to support research in the way we'd like. Now, I'm not suggesting that we support students simply as a means to an end, but what I quickly realized was that our goal of enhancing our research profile wasn't going to happen without enhancing our educational mission. And that was surprising to me. But when I quickly realized something like the winter term could impact 25% of our budget cut if we do this right, or something like if the mentoring program, it's a little more work for faculty, but if we, I will say another way to think about the data is the students who saw a mentor, their retention rate was 3 times as high as the students who didn't. Now, there's a huge bias and all kinds of other issues and how, I know, but that's a pretty impressive number. And if we can follow up on that, those are ways where I'm starting to realize, and that's where I've gotten this idea of the mission is not students and research, it's the extent to which we build both. And if we are successful in building that research infrastructure, that then helps students. That then provides better courses. It provides more research resources that can then be used for hands-on experiences for students. So I believe that there are things we need to do to focus on directly to support the research infrastructure. My number one priority for fundraising is still the Research Excellence Fund. And I'm a little hesitant to say this out loud because I don't know if we'll be successful, but we're aiming for $1 to $2 million a year that we're going to try to raise for that. That would allow us to provide some of those things that some of our peers have. I think in terms of budget and faculty, the biggest issue is, well, in terms of faculty, the biggest issue is when the budget comes back. We have been really assertive in terms of trying to retain faculty. And I think that's something we can control, because as we lose those faculty, that does impact research. So I guess the short answer of a very long and roundabout answer is, I think to solve one, we have to solve the other first. And if that works, I do feel confidence in our ability to work with you and to know how to then push us forward to take that next step in terms of research. Thank you. Well, we are past 5. I really appreciate everyone being here. The conversation is not done today. I hope that if you have any other thoughts, you'll share them. I know the anonymous feedback is done now, but there's other ways to get that information across if you're not comfortable bringing it forward. But if you are, we'd love to hear it. And thank you very much for being here.